All right, gather round, you sorry lot, and let me tell you the story of a man who didn't just sit around waiting for history to happen. He made it happen. His name? Johannes Erwin Eugen Rommel. Yeah, that Erwin Rommel. You might know him from the North African deserts, but before he became the infamous Desert Fox, he was just a scrappy little German kid with a knack for mechanics and a stubborn streak that could give a mule a run for its money. The Rommel household. Order, discipline, and engineering brilliance. Born on November 15, 1891, in Heidenheim, Germany, little Erwin wasn't raised in some warrior family steeped in Prussian military tradition. Nope. His old man, Erwin Rommel Sr., was a school principal, basically a man who enforced rules for a living. His mother, Helene von Loos, was from a respected Swabian family, so she made sure young Erwin understood the meaning of discipline and hard work. But here's where things get interesting. Rommel wasn't some bookish, frail little scholar destined for academia. The boy had an engineer's mind, always tinkering with gadgets and mechanics. Rumor has it, as a teenager, he built his own glider. A glider, not a toy, not a wooden airplane model, an actual, functioning glider. If that doesn't scream future military innovator, I don't know what does. His early years were all about structure, order, and relentless work ethic, traits that would later make him both feared and respected on the battlefield. But before all that, he was just another German lad, running around Swabia, building flying machines and probably making his teachers regret their career choices. A not-so-traditional path to the army. Now, here's the kicker. Young Rommel wasn't dead set on a military career at first. You'd think with Germany being, well, Germany, every kid would dream of wearing a Pickelhaube helmet and stomping around barking orders. Not Erwin. His real dream, becoming an engineer. Yeah, imagine that. The guy who would later outmaneuver the British across the Sahara originally just wanted to build bridges and fix machines. But fate, and his father, had other ideas. In 1910, at the ripe old age of 18, his old man nudged him toward the army. "Join the military," they said. "It'll be good for you," they said. So off he went, enlisting in the 124th Württemberg Infantry Regiment as an officer cadet. This was no cushy job with polished boots and champagne evenings. Nope, this was hard training, relentless discipline, and an introduction to what real military life was like. Rommel? He excelled. The man took to soldiering like a wolf takes to the hunt. He had an eye for tactics, a hunger for action, and an impressive knack for getting people to listen to him. He was promoted to lieutenant in 1912, a full 2 years before most of his peers. The brass took notice. This kid had something. World War I, a baptism by fire. Now this is where things heat up. In 1914, the world went up in flames, and young Lieutenant Rommel found himself smack dab in the middle of it. The Great War wasn't some gentleman's duel. It was a meat grinder, and Rommel, well, he didn't just survive. He thrived. His first taste of combat came in France, and let me tell you, it was anything but pretty. Mud, blood, and trenches full of terrified, half-starved soldiers. But Rommel? He was already proving to be something different. He led with boldness, moved fast, and didn't sit around waiting for orders when the situation demanded action. Then came the Carpathian Mountains campaign in 1915. If you think fighting in trenches is bad, try doing it while freezing your ass off in the mountains, knee-deep in snow, against some of the toughest troops in Europe. Rommel not only led, but he led brilliantly. His tactics were aggressive, his men fought like demons, and by the time the Austro-Hungarians and Germans pushed through, his name was already making rounds in the officers' mess. But his defining moment? Italy, 1917. The Battle of Caporetto. This was the big one, the kind of battle that makes or breaks reputations. The Germans, alongside their Austro-Hungarian allies, launched a lightning-fast assault against the Italians, and Rommel? He was at the tip of the spear. With just 150 men, he took 9,000 Italian prisoners in a stunning display of maneuver warfare. Read that again. 150 versus 9,000. That's not a battle. That's sorcery. His use of infiltration tactics, hitting the enemy from unexpected angles, moving faster than they could react, was nothing short of genius. The Italians never knew what hit them. This battle cemented Rommel's reputation. He was awarded the Pour le Mérite, Germany's highest military honor, and his commanders took notice. This young officer wasn't just good. He was something special. By 1918, the war was winding down, and Germany was on the losing end. Rommel, despite his brilliance on the battlefield, couldn't change that fact. But what he did do was prove himself to be one of the most adaptable and daring young officers in the German army. When the war ended, Rommel wasn't left sitting in some musty old barracks, reminiscing about past glories. No, he was already planning, already thinking, already learning. The lessons of World War I, mobility, surprise, tactical aggression, would stick with him. And when the world went to war again in 1939, the man they called the Desert Fox would put every single one of those lessons to deadly use. The war machine's reluctant rock star. All right, listen up, you half-wit history buffs, because this is where things get really interesting. See, Rommel wasn't just some run-of-the-mill officer who climbed the ranks kissing boots and writing memos. No, he was a frontline brawler, a bold-as-hell tactician, and perhaps most dangerously, a man who didn't always listen to orders, especially when those orders were stupid. And yet, despite all that, or maybe because of it, Rommel managed to catch the eye of the most dangerous man in Europe, Adolf Hitler. Rommel apparently knew how to impress a dictator without even trying. Now, back in the 1930s, Rommel wasn't some high-ranking general. He was an instructor, teaching the finer points of infantry tactics at the Dresden War Academy, which sounds fancy but mostly involved yelling at fresh recruits and pointing at maps. But then, in 1937, he wrote a book, Infantry Attacks, detailing his experiences from World War I. And folks, this book wasn't some dull academic manual on proper rifle formations. No, this was a fast-paced, action-packed, adrenaline-fueled guide to kicking ass in war. It was so damn good, it caught Hitler's attention. By 1939, Rommel had wormed his way into the Führer's inner circle, not because he was a political brown-noser, but because Hitler loved his boldness, his unconventional thinking, and the fact that he wrote about war the way it was actually fought, not the way bureaucrats imagined it. All right, you history rookies, let's rewind for a second because I left out one of the most ridiculous yet crucial moments that put Rommel in Hitler's good graces. See, writing infantry attacks got Rommel noticed, sure, but that wasn't enough to lock in his golden ticket to the inner circle. No, that honor came from something so absurdly simple, you'd think I was making it up. It happened in 1939, right before the invasion of Poland, during one of those pompous Nazi military reviews where all the big brass were strutting around, making speeches and pretending they actually knew what war was like. Rommel, as part of Hitler's personal security detail, was standing around when something completely mundane happened, a traffic jam. Now, a traffic jam in wartime Germany wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a logistical nightmare. If Hitler's convoy got bogged down, that meant delays, vulnerability, and a whole lot of angry Nazis barking orders at each other. But guess who stepped in? Rommel. Instead of waiting around for someone else to handle it, he took charge on the spot, started directing traffic like a damn street cop, and cleared the jam in minutes. And because fate has a sense of humor, Hitler just so happened to be watching. Now, imagine the scene. You're Hitler, surrounded by generals who live off bureaucracy and overcomplicated command structures, and then you see this one officer, bold, decisive, acting without hesitation, taking control of a situation that, let's be honest, shouldn't have even been a problem in the first place. That was all it took. After the convoy got moving again, Hitler immediately took an interest in Rommel. It wasn't just about infantry attacks anymore. It was about his ability to lead under pressure. Because to Hitler, Rommel's quick decision-making in something as small as traffic control meant he could be trusted with bigger responsibilities. From that moment on, Hitler saw Rommel as one of his go-to commanders. And that, my friends, is how stopping traffic got Rommel the keys to a panzer division and the fast track to history. And to think some officers spend years sucking up to get a promotion. Rommel just handled a damn traffic jam. So when World War II kicked off, Rommel wasn't sent to some desk job pushing papers. He was given command of the Führerbegleitbataillon, Hitler's personal bodyguard unit, during the invasion of Poland. Now, imagine being Rommel, one of the most talented tactical minds of his generation, stuck babysitting a dictator instead of leading tanks into battle. But Rommel wasn't about to spend the war playing security detail, and in 1940 he finally got what he really wanted: tanks. Blitzkrieg, France, and the making of a legend. The German invasion of France in 1940 was one of the fastest military victories in history. And guess who was at the forefront of the chaos? That's right, our boy Rommel. He was given command of the 7th Panzer Division, and in typical Rommel fashion, he didn't just follow orders. He rewrote the damn playbook. His division moved so fast that even the German high command lost track of him. Imagine that. Your own guys are looking at the map, scratching their heads, saying, "Wait, where the hell is Rommel?" Meanwhile, he's smashing through French lines like a wrecking ball, taking towns before the defenders even knew they were under attack. Ah, yes, I hear you. The great intellectual debate. Who really came up with Blitzkrieg? Was it Captain Basil Liddell Hart, the British theorist who scribbled down ideas about fast-moving, mechanized warfare from the safety of his desk? Or was it Rommel, the guy who actually took those theories, threw them into an engine, and ran over France with them at 60 miles per hour? Look, war isn't won by armchair strategists pontificating over tea. It's won by who executes best. Maybe Liddell Hart had the idea first. Maybe some other obscure theorist did too. But last time I checked, the history books don't hand out medals for conceptual contributions. They remember the guy who actually made it work. And in 1940, it wasn't Liddell Hart blitzing through the Ardennes. It was Rommel. So instead of arguing about who thought of Blitzkrieg, maybe the better question is, doesn't it only matter who used it best? Or at all? Now back to the action. The French and British. They started calling Rommel's unit the Ghost Division because it moved too fast to track. This wasn't just Blitzkrieg, it was Rommelkrieg. And by the time the dust settled, he was one of the biggest stars in the German military, promoted to lieutenant general, and handpicked for a new mission, a mission that would give him his legendary nickname, Rommel's Wild Ride. The time he took a town with a joyride. All right, you pack of history-starved misfits, let me tell you one of my favorite Rommel stories. See, most generals, when they need to get a feel for the battlefield, they sit behind a nice wooden desk, sip on coffee, and let some poor lieutenant tell them what's going on. Not Rommel. Oh no, he had a habit of personally scouting the front lines, like a lunatic, in a damn car, with no backup, no heavy escort, just his driver and some binoculars. And this one time in France, he took it to a whole new level of crazy. Picture this. It's 1940, and Rommel's 7th Panzer Division is tearing through France like a knife through butter. The man's moving so fast that even his own staff can't keep up. He's barreling toward a town, trying to figure out just how well defended it is. So naturally, Rommel, being completely insane, decides, screw it, I'll just drive in myself. And that's exactly what he does. He boots his driver out of the car, jumps behind the wheel, and speeds straight into enemy-occupied territory like a lunatic with a death wish. But he doesn't stop there. Oh no. Instead of sneaking around, he drives right into the middle of the town square, alone in broad daylight, like he owns the damn place. Now, the French soldiers in town, they're standing around watching this lone German officer in his staff car casually cruise through their town, and they have no idea how to react. Imagine you're a French soldier, and suddenly Rommel himself rolls up like he's looking for a parking spot. Is this an attack? A trick? A lost tourist? Is he about to ask for directions? The sheer audacity of the moment freezes them in place. And while they're too stunned to react, Rommel, he just keeps driving. He circles the town square like a man checking out real estate, and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, He's already back on the road, heading straight for German lines. And what do you think happens next? Well, once Rommel is safely back with his division, he casually orders his actual troops to roll in and take the town. The French, still reeling from the absolute madness of what just happened, collapse without a fight. The takeaway? Confidence is a hell of a weapon. Rommel didn't take that town with tanks, artillery, or even a single damn bullet. He took it with pure audacity and a steering wheel. That, folks, is why they called him the Desert Fox later on. It wasn't just his brilliance. It was his nerve, his speed, and his ability to pull off the kind of stunts that sound too wild to be real. And let's be honest, if this were a Hollywood movie, you'd roll your eyes and say, "Yeah, right, like a general would actually do that." But this wasn't a movie. It was just another Tuesday for Erwin Rommel. Welcome to hell, the North African campaign. In early 1941, Italy was making a royal mess of their invasion of North Africa. Mussolini's boys were getting their teeth kicked in by the British, and Hitler needed someone to clean up the disaster. Enter Rommel. Now here's the fun part. Rommel was technically just supposed to be an advisor to the Italians, but do you think a man like Rommel was going to sit back and let others handle things? Hell no. The moment he set foot in Africa, he took command, threw out the defensive strategy the Italians were using, which consisted mostly of running away, and went on the offensive. And just like that, the legend of the Desert Fox was born. The British gave him that nickname, and they didn't mean it as a compliment. See, Rommel had a nasty habit of showing up where he wasn't supposed to be, hitting hard, and disappearing before anyone could counterattack. He used deception, speed, and sheer audacity to outmaneuver the British time and time again. Rommel's joyride through enemy lines, the Desert Edition. All right, you lot, if you thought Rommel taking a joyride into an enemy-held town in France was nuts, wait until you hear what he pulled off in North Africa. This is the kind of story that makes you wonder if the man was actually a general or just a war-hardened daredevil with a death wish. So picture this. It's somewhere in the vast, sun-scorched, hellish landscape of North Africa, and Rommel is doing what Rommel does best, moving fast, hitting hard, and confusing the absolute hell out of the British. But this time, he takes it to a whole new level of insanity. The setup. A routine scout turns into a stunt show. Rommel is out near the front lines, personally scouting the situation because, let's be honest, he never trusted second-hand reports, not when he could drive straight into enemy territory himself. He's cruising in his favorite open-topped Horch staff car, flanked by his driver and a couple of aides, when, surprise, Rommel pulls one of his classic, "Trust me, I got this" moments. Without hesitation, he all but yells, "Hold my beer!" Okay, maybe not in those exact words, but you get the idea. Boots his men out of the car, because say what you will about his reckless stunts, the man never endangered his troops needlessly. Rommel takes the wheel himself and slams the gas pedal down like he's trying to outrun the devil himself, driving it straight into the middle of a British-occupied town. And what does he do next? He drives straight into the damn town square, right through the middle of enemy forces, and starts circling like a lunatic. The British soldiers? Completely baffled. Imagine being one of them, just standing around, minding your own business, when suddenly Rommel himself comes tearing into town in his own damn car, doing laps around the square like it's a Sunday drive. The sheer audacity of the move stuns them into inaction. Nobody shoots. Nobody reacts. They just stare. Rommel, cool as a damn iceberg, completes his little joyride, then rips back out of town before anyone fully processes what just happened. By the time the British finally snap out of their confusion and go, "Wait a damn minute, that was Rommel," he's already long gone, back on the desert road, kicking up dust. And just to put the cherry on top of this ridiculous stunt, he then calmly orders his actual troops to move in and take the town. Which they do, with ease. Now where are the lessons you can learn from the Desert Fox's wild ride? If you act like you belong somewhere, people might just believe you do. Confidence and audacity can be just as deadly as bullets and tanks. If you ever find yourself in enemy territory, just floor it and hope they're too shocked to react. This wasn't just another battle. This was Rommel's signature move in a nutshell. Move fast, confuse the enemy, and strike before they even realize they've lost. And that, my friends, is how the Desert Fox turned a near capture into a goddamn victory lap. Even when he was outnumbered, low on supplies, and relying on captured British fuel, he kept punching above his weight class. He took Tobruk in 1942, one of the biggest victories of the entire African campaign. And the best part? His own superiors never expected him to succeed. But that's just how Rommel operated. He didn't sit around waiting for permission. He acted, and more often than not, he won. Rommel, the commander who actually respected his enemies. Now let's get something straight. Rommel was not your typical Nazi general. He had zero patience for cruelty, zero love for the SS, and he actually treated prisoners with respect. This wasn't some PR stunt. This was just who he was. When British and Australian soldiers were captured in Afrika, Rommel made sure they were given medical treatment, food, and water, sometimes before his own men. He personally intervened when the SS tried to execute Jewish prisoners in North Africa, flat out telling them to get the hell out of his war zone. And Hitler? Oh, Hitler hated this. But Rommel didn't care. And speaking of defying Hitler, Rommel was no fan of Hitler's delusions, and he had no problem ignoring idiotic orders. Hitler ordered him to stand and fight at El Alamein. Rommel knew that was suicide, so he retreated to save his men. Hitler demanded he execute captured commandos. Rommel said hell no and treated them as POWs. Hitler insisted the war was still winnable. Rommel saw the writing on the wall and started voicing doubts. By 1943, his men worshipped him. The German people adored him, and the high command feared him, because he was too damn good and too damn independent. But his North African miracle had limits. With British and American forces closing in, supply lines cut, and Hitler refusing to send reinforcements, Rommel was finally pushed back. By March 1943, he was recalled to Germany. And just like that, the Desert Fox was out of the desert. By the time Rommel was pulled out of Afrika in March 1943, he wasn't just physically exhausted, he was falling apart. See, commanding a war from the scorching heat of the North African desert wasn't just about outmaneuvering the British and Americans. It was about surviving the brutal conditions. Rommel had been pushing his body to the absolute limit for over 2 years, barely sleeping, barely eating, and constantly riding into battle himself like some kind of medieval knight with a panzer division. By the time Hitler recalled him, he was suffering from chronic fatigue, blood pressure issues, and severe stomach problems. Doctors diagnosed him with a mix of gastritis and a liver disorder, both made worse by stress, dehydration, and malnutrition. Let's be honest, Rommel had been living off of bad rations, cigarettes, and sheer adrenaline for months. It's a miracle he didn't drop dead in the desert. When he returned to Germany, he was a wreck. He was so sick that he had to be hospitalized in Munich, where doctors put him on bed rest, heavy medication, and a strict diet. And let's just say, telling Rommel to rest was like telling a panzer tank to slow down. The man hated being out of action. His recovery was long and frustrating. While the Nazis were losing Stalingrad and the war was spiraling out of control, Rommel was stuck in bed, forced to read reports instead of writing battle plans. He spent months regaining his strength, and although he never fully recovered, by early 1944, he was well enough to return to duty, this time to oversee the defense of France. But the war had changed, and so had Rommel. His time in the hospital had given him something rare for a German officer: time to think. And what he realized was terrifying. Germany wasn't going to win this war. And the man who had once been Hitler's golden general, he was about to become his greatest critic. The iconic look of the Desert Fox, a general who wore his legacy. Before we dive into the final chapter of Rommel's story, let's take a moment to appreciate the man's legendary presence, because when you picture Erwin Rommel, you don't just see any German general in a drab field uniform. No, you see a symbol of battlefield brilliance, a warrior who commanded both respect and admiration from his men, his enemies, and even history itself. Let's start with those iconic goggles. You know the ones. The round, dust-covered pair strapped across his officer's cap or slung around his neck. They weren't just for show. Rommel was a frontline commander, and when you're tearing across the African desert in a half-track at breakneck speeds, dodging artillery and outflanking your enemies, you need to see through the storm of dust and smoke. Those goggles became synonymous with his legend, as much a part of him as his tactical genius. Then there were his awards, and folks, Rommel wasn't just decorated. He was dripping in battlefield honors. The Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, one of the highest military honors in the Third Reich, awarded for extraordinary bravery. The Pour le Mérite, that legendary Prussian medal that had been worn by the likes of the Red Baron, Rommel earned his back in World War I for sheer audacity in battle. Unlike some generals who like to wear their awards like a Christmas tree, Rommel wore his with purpose, not as a boast, but as a reminder to his men that he was one of them, a soldier first and an officer second. This was the look of the Desert Fox, the gritted determination, the goggles resting on his cap, the Knight's Cross pinned to his collar, and the ever-present fire in his eyes that told everyone, friend and foe alike, this was a man who didn't command from behind a desk. No, Rommel led from the front, until the Reich itself turned against him. Rommel versus the Reich, the last stand of the Desert Fox. All right, strap in, because this is where Rommel stops just being a brilliant field commander and starts becoming something even more dangerous, a man with a conscience. See, by the time he was pulled out of Africa in 1943, Rommel was still one of the most respected military minds in Germany. But the problem was, the higher-ups, especially Hitler, were starting to realize something unsettling. Rommel wasn't just respected by the troops. He was loved. And not just by the Wehrmacht, but by the German people. The Nazis? They had plenty of heroes, but most of them were fanatical bootlickers or ruthless butchers. Rommel was neither. He was a soldier's general, a tactical genius, and, worst of all for Hitler, a man who openly disagreed with orders when they were stupid. And in 1944, when the Allies were about to storm Fortress Europe, Rommel was sent to France to prepare the Atlantic Wall. Hitler expected miracles. Rommel, being an actual realist, saw what was coming. D-Day and the reality check no one wanted. When Rommel arrived in France, he took one look at the coastal defenses and immediately saw the problem. The Atlantic Wall was a joke, nowhere near strong enough to stop an invasion. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. Allied bombers owned the skies. The German army was spread too thin and running low on fuel, men, and morale. So what did Rommel do? He demanded change. He ignored Hitler's fantasies of pushing the Allies back into the sea, and instead ordered tank defenses moved closer to the beaches, because he knew once the Allies landed, it was over if they got inland. He begged High Command to reinforce Normandy, and when they refused, he went ahead and fortified it anyway. Then came June 6, 1944, D-Day. And guess what? Rommel wasn't even there. He'd taken a brief leave to visit his family, because he knew damn well things were about to go sideways. And while he was gone, the largest invasion in history hit the beaches of Normandy. Despite all his efforts, the German defense crumbled, and the Allies pushed through. Rommel, furious, immediately went to Hitler and laid out the facts. The Reich was done. The Allies were too strong. Germany needed to surrender before the whole country was reduced to rubble. And what did Hitler do? He laughed. Rommel, one of the most brilliant minds in the entire German military, had just told Hitler the truth, and Hitler didn't care. That's when Rommel knew. Hitler wasn't just wrong. He was insane. A mission to kill the Desert Fox, the commandos' encounter with Rommel. Late 1944, somewhere in occupied France. The two men crouched in the cold, darkened forest, barely breathing as they watched the flickering lights of the German headquarters in the distance. They had trained for months for this moment. Operation Gaff, a top-secret Allied mission with one objective: eliminate Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. The British had come to fear and respect Rommel more than any other German commander. He was too damn smart, too damn fast, and, most dangerous of all, too damn independent. Now, with the Allies pushing into France after D-Day, Rommel was back in Europe, fortifying defenses and making life hell for the advancing troops. Someone, somewhere, had decided that if Rommel could be taken out, it might speed up the collapse of the German front. The job fell to the SAS, Britain's toughest and most elite soldiers. The two commandos, Jack William Smith Hughes and Sergeant Major John Jock Finlayson, had been inserted behind enemy lines with a small team. The plan was simple but suicidal: infiltrate Rommel's headquarters, assassinate him, and disappear before the Germans knew what had happened. But there was one problem. Rommel wasn't there. Instead of assassinating the Desert Fox, the commandos ran into his men, and before they could fight their way out, they were captured. For elite operatives trained in survival, this was as bad as it got. They expected to be shot on sight as Hitler's standing order, or worse, handed over to the Gestapo, where their chances of survival would drop to absolute zero. Instead, they were blindfolded, marched through enemy territory, and, strangely enough, treated with a kind of reluctant respect. The SAS had no illusions about what the Nazis usually did to captured commandos, but something about this situation felt different. When the blindfolds were finally removed, they found themselves standing face to face with Rommel himself. The man was everything the British had heard: stoic, sharp-eyed, his uniform crisp, his Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords pinned proudly to his collar. And of course, the signature goggles, resting on his cap like a soldier's crown. To their absolute shock, Rommel did not order their execution. He did not scream, threaten, or even interrogate them. Instead, he simply studied them for a long moment before speaking. "What was your mission?" he asked in fluent English. The commandos, hardened warriors though they were, said nothing. Their orders were clear: give up nothing, not even under torture. Rommel smirked as if he expected their silence. Then, to their surprise, he offered them food and water. "You are soldiers," he said, "not spies. You are doing your duty, just as I am doing mine." The commandos exchanged a look. This was not what they had expected. They had been briefed on brutal German interrogators, ruthless SS officers, and Gestapo torturers. But this? Rommel had them fed, treated with respect, and instead of sending them to some dark fate in a prison camp, he did something unheard of. He sent them back. As the two commandos prepared to be escorted back across enemy lines, one of them made an unusual request. Sergeant Major John Jock Finlayson turned to Rommel's men and asked, "Would it be possible for me to walk back without the hood this time?" The German officers looked at him, confused. Rommel himself raised an eyebrow. "And why is that?" Finlayson, standing tall despite having just survived what should have been a death sentence, replied with absolute sincerity, "So that when the war is over, I can bring my wife here and show her the place where I met the great Rommel." For a moment there was silence. The Germans, men who had fought and bled under Rommel's command, stood in quiet respect. Even in the middle of a brutal, unforgiving war, even after being sent on a mission to kill this very man, Finlayson had seen what so many others refused to acknowledge, that Rommel was more than just another German general. Rommel, never one for unnecessary sentiment, gave a small nod and turned to his men. "Let him see," he said simply. The hood was removed, and Finlayson memorized every detail of the location: the layout of the trees, the curve of the road, the position of Rommel's headquarters. He committed it all to memory, knowing that if he survived the war, he would return. And return he did. Years later, after the guns had fallen silent and the world had changed forever, Finlayson kept his word. He brought his wife back to that very spot, stood where he had once been captured, and told her the story of the day he met the greatest general of the war, Erwin Rommel, a man who fought with honor, even in a war where honor had long been abandoned. And that, my friends, was one of the final straws for Hitler. So, who wants to kill Hitler? By this time, it wasn't just Rommel who saw that Hitler was off his rocker. Half the German officer corps wanted the guy gone. And by mid-1944, they weren't just thinking about it. They were planning it. The July 20th, 1944, Valkyrie plot wasn't some half-assed assassination attempt. It was a full-blown military coup, and the plotters knew that if it worked, they needed a respected military leader to step in. Enter Rommel. Now, Rommel wasn't the type to go around planting bombs, but he wanted the war to end, and more importantly, he wanted Hitler gone before Germany got wiped off the map. So when the conspirators came to him for his blessing, he didn't exactly say no. But Rommel, being the eternal optimist, thought maybe he could talk some sense into Hitler instead. Yeah, you can already see where this is going. So, Rommel decides to give it one last shot, one final meeting with Hitler to convince him to surrender before Germany was completely obliterated. But before he could do that, his car was attacked on July 17, 1944. Now, officially, it was Allied fighter planes that strafed his vehicle. But let's be real, this was too convenient. The SS and Gestapo knew Rommel was connected to the resistance, and suddenly, just days before the Valkyrie plot goes down, he's nearly killed in a random air attack. Yeah, sure. Rommel survived, but he was badly wounded, with a fractured skull and a busted face. While he was recovering, Valkyrie went forward without him. And then it failed. The moment the bomb didn't kill Hitler, the Gestapo went nuts rounding up conspirators. And guess whose name came up? That's right, Rommel. Now Hitler had a big problem. Rommel was too damn popular. He couldn't just execute him outright. The German people would lose their minds. The Wehrmacht might even revolt. The last moments of the Desert Fox. October 14th, 1944. The air was heavy, thick with the kind of silence that only comes when a man knows he's about to die. Rommel, the once great Desert Fox, the man who had outmaneuvered armies and defied Hitler himself, sat in his study, staring out at the trees swaying in the autumn breeze. His home in Herlingen was quiet, too quiet. No radio, no reports, no letters, just the unbearable weight of the inevitable pressing down on him. He knew this day was coming the moment he saw the black Mercedes pull up his driveway earlier that morning. Inside that car were two SS officers, Generals Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Meisel, and when the SS comes calling for a private discussion, you don't exactly expect an invitation to a Sunday brunch. They were polite, too polite. Burgdorf wasted no time. He delivered the order, blunt and clinical, like a doctor informing a patient they had terminal cancer. You have two options, Field Marshal. Option 1. Stand trial for treason. Be found guilty, obviously. Be paraded before a Nazi kangaroo court. Be executed like a common criminal. And, here's the kicker, have your soldiers and family punished alongside you. Option 2. Take this pill, die quickly and quietly, and Berlin will spin it as a heroic death from war wounds. Your soldiers and family will be left alone, your name will be honored, and your legacy will remain intact. Rommel already knew his answer. He didn't ask for time to think. He didn't bargain. He didn't beg. He just sat there for a long moment, nodding slowly, as if finally acknowledging that this was how his war would end. Not with a battle, not with a final victory, but with poison in a small glass vial. He turned to his teenage son, Manfred, who had been standing in the room with him, watching the exchange in stunned silence. "Go inside, Manfred," he said quietly. "Take care of your mother." Manfred started to protest, but Rommel just gave him that look, the one that said, "This is not up for debate." His wife, Lucia, already knew. She had always known. The war had stolen her husband long ago, and now it was here to collect the debt in full. He gave her one last kiss on the forehead, held her for a moment, then straightened his uniform like the proud soldier he had always been. Then he walked out the front door and into history. The walk to the car, the last march of the Desert Fox. The black Mercedes sat idling at the end of the driveway. The SS officers stood by the doors, waiting like undertakers at a funeral. Rommel walked slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel, his hands tucked behind his back. Not out of fear, not out of submission, but because that's just how he walked when he was thinking. Mizell, clearly uncomfortable with the whole thing, opened the car door for him. Bergdorf, on the other hand, just lit a cigarette, watching the whole thing with the cold indifference of a man who had done this before. Rommel paused for a moment, taking in the crisp October air, the rustling of the leaves, the peace of the countryside he had fought so hard to protect. Then, with a slight sigh, he ducked into the car, settling into the back seat like he was just going for a drive into town. Mizell got in beside him. Bergdorf sat in the front passenger seat. The driver shifted into gear, and the black Mercedes began rolling down the road, away from the house, away from his family, away from everything. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the countryside passing by in an ironic kind of calmness, as if even nature had decided to show Rommel some respect in his final moments. Then Bergdorf reached into his coat and pulled out the small glass vial. "It'll be fast," he said, matter-of-factly, as he handed it to Rommel. Rommel took it, turning it over in his hand, feeling the weight of the tiny vial that would soon end his life. No hesitation, no fear. He popped the cap, took one last deep breath, and drank it down. The death of a legend. The cyanide worked fast. Within seconds, Rommel's body seized up. His fingers twitched, his breath caught in his throat, and then, like a great machine suddenly running out of power, he slumped forward in his seat. Mizell, who had been staring straight ahead, suddenly panicked. "He's dead!" he shouted. "Drive to the hospital! Quickly!" Bergdorf? He didn't flinch. He knew there was no hospital. There was no saving Rommel. There was only the script, the story Berlin wanted to tell. The driver followed orders, rushing toward a military hospital, even though they all knew it was just for show. By the time the car pulled up to the building, Rommel was already gone, his head resting against the window, his once sharp blue eyes now glassy and empty. The nurse who came running outside knew instantly what had happened. Rommel had been perfectly fine that morning. Now suddenly he had died of war wounds? Please. But this was Nazi Germany. Nobody asked questions. The lie they told. Berlin wasted no time spinning the story. Within hours, the radio broadcast Rommel's heroic death. The field marshal succumbed to his injuries from the air attack. A national hero gone too soon. The Führer mourns his loyal commander. A state funeral was arranged. Flowers, flags, military honors. A grand, glorious farewell for the man they had just murdered. His family played along because they had no choice. They stood at his funeral, listening to Nazi officials praise the man they had forced to take poison. And yet, despite all the lies, despite all the attempts to cover up the truth, one thing remained undeniable. Rommel had never been theirs. Not really. He had been a soldier, not a fanatic. He had fought for his country, not for the Nazi cause. He had resisted the madness, ignored the orders that were cruel, and in the end, when given a choice between dying with dignity or dying with shame, he chose dignity. And that's why history remembers him.